The McLaren sat silent under bright showroom lights. Hood open, tools scattered everywhere. 100 mechanics had tried. 100 had failed. The billionaire owner crossed his arms and smirked. It's impossible. Then a single dad in oil-stained boots stepped forward. He looked once, listened carefully, then said two quiet words. It's simple. The room burst into laughter until the engine roared. True mastery doesn't need applause. It only needs silence and a single moment to prove itself. The air in the coal and sun garage smelled of burnt coffee, old grease, and a lingering sense of peace that felt heavy with history. Ryan Cole was 42 years old, though the lines around his eyes suggested he had lived twice that. His hands were a map of scars, permanent oil stains, and calluses earned from decades of fighting iron and steel. To the town of Silver Creek, he was just the grease monkey, the guy you called when your rusted pickup truck wouldn't turn over or your radiator started screaming on a Tuesday. But to 9-year-old Leo, he was a giant, a hero who could solve any puzzle with a wrench and a bit of patience. Ryan's life had fractured 5 years ago. His wife, Sarah, had been the light in his workshop, the one who turned the radio to jazz and brought him sandwiches when he lost track of time. She passed away during childbirth complications. Leo survived, a tiny spark of life in a cold world. But Ryan's heart had developed a crack that no weld could fix. He buried his grief under the hoods of cars. Engines made sense to him. They were logical. They had rules. If a piston misfired, there was a reason. If a belt snapped, there was a cause. People, on the other hand, were fragile and unpredictable, a mystery he no longer had the strength to solve. Before the silence of Silver Creek, Ryan was a legend whispered in the paddocks of Monaco and Silverstone. He was the ghost of the pit, the head diagnostic engineer for a premier European Formula One racing team. He lived in the fast lane. Literally, he could diagnose a transmission fault at 200 miles per hour just by looking at a telemetry curve. But when Leo was born and Sarah was gone, the glitz of the high-performance world felt hollow. He walked away from the fame, the champagne, and the six-figure bonuses. He chose the stability of a small town over the adrenaline of the track. He chose being a dad over being a star. One Tuesday morning, while Ryan was draining the black, gritty oil from a beat-up sedan, a news report flashed on the dusty, grease-covered radio. The mystery of the Vale McLaren continues to baffle the automotive world, the announcer said, his voice tinged with excitement. Billionaire Marcus Vale's limited edition hypercar, a $20 million masterpiece, remains a dead weight in the center of his city showroom. 100 of the world's elite technicians have flown in from 3 continents, yet the engine refuses to even cough. Vale has publicly declared it a mechanical impossibility and offered a massive reward to anyone who can bring the beast back to life. Ryan didn't look up. He just let the oil drip into the pan, the steady plink, 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 matching the beat of the radio. But Leo, sitting on a stack of worn tires with his school books, looked at his father with wide eyes. Dad, did you hear that? They said it's impossible. Can a machine just quit? Does it get tired of being fast? Ryan stopped. He wiped his black-stained hands on a rag and looked at his son. Nothing mechanical is impossible, Leo. Machines don't have egos. They don't have bad days or broken hearts. They don't lie. If it isn't starting, it's because it's missing something it needs. Air, fuel, or a spark. It's always that simple. Then why can't 100 smart people fix it? Leo asked, leaning forward. Because, Ryan replied softly, his voice carrying the weight of his past life. Sometimes people are so busy looking for a complicated answer that they miss the truth standing right in front of them. They look for ghosts in the computer when the problem is in the dirt. That night, Ryan couldn't sleep. He sat in his dark kitchen looking at his old, heavy toolbox, the one with the Scuderia racing decals peeling off the sides. He knew that McLaren model. He had been in the room when the first prototype's cooling system was being debated. He knew its soul. He decided to go. Not for the money, not for Marcus Vale's ego, but to show Leo that the world isn't as scary or as impossible as the news makes it out to be. As he loaded his old truck, Leo ran out to the driveway in his pajamas. He handed Ryan a small, battered wrench keychain, a toy they had found at a garage sale. "For luck, Dad," the boy whispered. "Tell the car I said hello." Ryan tucked the keychain into his pocket, felt the cold steel, and drove toward the distant glow of the city lights. The human mark was set. Ryan wasn't just going to fix a machine. He was going to prove to his son that no matter how complex the world seems, there is always a way forward. The Vale showroom was a temple of glass, steel, and unbridled arrogance. When Ryan walked through the heavy revolving doors, his heavy, oil-stained work boots squeaked loudly against the pristine white marble. The air was thick with the scent of $500 cologne and the sharp tang of high-tech cleaning fluids. Around the McLaren, a carbon fiber predator that looked fast even while standing still, stood a dozen men in white lab coats. They held tablets and oscilloscopes like they were performing open-heart surgery. Marcus Vale stood in the center, his tailored Italian suit fitting him like a second skin. He was a man who bought mountains and sold oceans, yet he looked defeated by a pile of metal. He was looking at his platinum watch every 10 seconds. "Who invited the janitor?" a voice sneered. Marcus turned, his eyes trailing down Ryan's faded, grease-smeared jeans and his weathered face. "Who are you?" "Mechanic number 101, Ryan said, his voice level and devoid of any intimidation. A lead technician, a man with a PhD in aerodynamics and a very expensive haircut, snickered loudly. "Look at those boots. Did you bring a hammer and a prayer, old man? We've used $5 million in diagnostic hardware from the factory in Woking. The ECU is verified. The fuel rails are at 3,000 psi. The battery is at peak voltage. The car is technically perfect. It just won't start. Go back to your tractors before you get oil on the floor." Ryan didn't react. He didn't even look at the man. He walked to the front of the room, standing right at the nose of the car. He could smell the carbon fiber and the high-octane fuel. "Silence," Ryan said. "Excuse me," Marcus barked, startled by the command. "I said silence. Turn off the music. Stop the talking. Put the tablets away. I need to hear the car. A car talks to you if you are quiet enough to listen." Shiver. Marcus, desperate and intrigued by the sheer confidence of this stranger, signaled his staff. The room went quiet. The humming of the air conditioning seemed to get louder. Ryan climbed into the driver's seat. He didn't try to turn the key. He didn't touch the pedals. He closed his eyes. He pressed his palm against the leather dashboard, feeling for the tiny vibrations of the cooling fans and the electronic relays. He pressed the ignition button once. Click. A dry, electronic sound. He did it again. Click. The experts began to whisper and mock him from the sidelines. "See? We told him. It's a phantom fault in the security encryption. He's just sitting there dreaming." Ryan got out and walked to the engine bay at the rear. He didn't reach for a computer or a scanner. He pulled a small, high-powered flashlight from his belt. He ignored the dramatic speculation about quantum chip degradation or sensor latency. As he scanned the engine bay, he noticed something subtle. Along the interior trim of the car, there were tiny aftermarket LED strips, thin lines of blue light that illuminated the engine for the showroom display. Purely cosmetic, something Marcus had added to make the car look futuristic for his wealthy friends. Ryan followed the tiny thin wire. It was tucked neatly, almost perfectly, behind the main high-voltage wiring loom. "You're chasing the wrong system," Ryan said quietly, his voice echoing in the silent showroom. Marcus stepped forward, his curiosity piqued. "What do you mean? The engine is the system." "No," Ryan replied. "The engine is the result. You're chasing software because software is expensive and makes you feel smart. You're chasing pride. But a car doesn't care about your PhD or your bank account. It cares about ground. It cares about a complete circuit. You've buried the engineering under a mountain of silicon and ego, and now you can't see the simple break in the chain." Ryan explained that the aftermarket lights had been spliced into the wrong harness by a luxury customizer who didn't understand high-frequency interference. Over time, the vibration of the transport truck had caused a microscopic grounding fault. Every time the ignition button was pressed, A tiny spike of static electricity leaked into the security loom. The car's brain thought it was being hot-wired by a thief. It wasn't a glitch. It was a safety feature doing exactly what it was designed to do: protect itself. "It's not the engine," Ryan said, reaching into a narrow gap and pulling a single blue wire free. "It's the vanity you added to it. You tried to make it look better, and in doing so, you made it stop being a car." The engineers scoffed. They called him a lunatic. One of them stepped forward, pointing a finger at Ryan's chest. "That's impossible. That circuit is isolated. You're a fraud trying to get 15 minutes of fame. Our sensors would have picked up a surge." Ryan looked him dead in the eye. "Your sensors only look for what they're programmed to find. I'm looking for the truth." But Ryan didn't rush. He didn't get angry. He pulled a small bottle of contact cleaner from his pocket and a piece of sandpaper. He wiped his hands slowly, his face a mask of calm, refusing to let their noise disturb his internal rhythm. He felt the wrench keychain in his pocket. He thought of Leo. The human mark was clear. In a room full of shouting men trying to prove they were important, the quietest man was the only one who was actually listening to the truth. Ryan didn't use a laptop. He didn't even use a multimeter. He used a simple wire stripper and a piece of heat-shrink tubing that cost less than a cent. The engineers watched with crossed arms, their faces twisted in a mixture of mockery and growing unease. Marcus Vale stood by the marble fountain, his hand hovering over his phone, ready to call security to have this clown removed. Ryan removed a minor carbon fiber panel near the firewall. He rerouted the ground wire away from the sensitive lighting circuit and back to a primary chassis point. He didn't just twist wires together. He performed a surgical bypass, sealing it with a precision that only comes from years in a high-pressure pit lane. Then he leaned into the cabin and began a strange dance, pressing the throttle 3 times, holding the brake, and clicking the paddle shifters in a specific cadence. He was manually recalibrating the ECU, the brain of the car, using a backdoor sequence he had learned 20 years ago in a garage in Italy. It was knowledge that isn't found in digital manuals. It was the old-school secret of the men who built these cars by hand. "It's ready," Ryan said, stepping back. Marcus stepped forward, his face a mixture of doubt and desperation. "If this doesn't work, I'm going to make sure no garage in this country ever hires you again. You're wasting my time." Ryan shrugged, his eyes steady. "If it doesn't work, I'll give you my garage, my tools, and my house. But it'll work because the car wants to run. You're the only one stopping it." The silence in the room was suffocating. It was so quiet you could hear the ticking of the wall clock. Every breath was held. The technicians stopped whispering. Ryan reached into the window and pressed the start button. The starter motor whined for a fraction of a second, a high-pitched, hopeful sound. The engine coughed once, spitting out a small plume of blue-white smoke from the center exhaust. And then, roar. The twin-turbo V8 erupted into life with a violence that was beautiful. The sound was like a thunderclap trapped in a glass box, a primal scream of mechanical joy. The vibrations were so intense they shook the champagne glasses on the tables, causing them to hum. The roar was aggressive, perfect, screaming with a life that had been bottled up for weeks. The engineers stood frozen, their mouths open. Their tablets were still showing red system error icons, but the reality was screaming at them at 8,000 RPM. The car wasn't broken. It was furious. Marcus Vale stared at the vibrating carbon fiber hood. He looked like he had just seen a miracle. He looked at the dashboard. All the warning lights were gone. The car was healthy. Ryan stepped back, pulled a clean microfiber cloth from his back pocket, and wiped a tiny smear of oil from the fender. He spoke over the deafening mechanical symphony, his voice precise, technical, and utterly calm. The aftermarket lights created a parasitic draw. It wasn't enough to blow a main fuse, but it was enough to confuse the voltage drop sensor. The car's security system thought it was being stolen, so it locked the fuel injectors. You spent a week looking at the brain, looking for a tumor, when the problem was just a splinter in the toe. Marcus walked over, his eyes wide with a respect he hadn't felt for anyone in years. "Who are you? Truly?" I've had the best in the world here. I've had guys with degrees from MIT and Oxford. They couldn't find a single fault. Old school, Ryan replied, putting his wire strippers back in his belt. Before shortcuts, before we started trusting screens more than our own senses. A computer can tell you what's happening, but it can't always tell you why. You have to understand the metal to understand the machine. Marcus reached into his inner suit pocket and pulled out a gold-embossed checkbook. He began to write with a shaky hand. I want you. I want you to head my entire global fleet. $2 million a year to start. A private jet on standby. You'll be the most famous mechanic in the world by tomorrow morning. Your face will be on every automotive magazine from here to Tokyo. The room waited for Ryan to say yes. It was the ultimate Cinderella moment. The wealth, the power, the chance to return to the world he had left behind as a king. But Ryan thought of his small-town garage. He thought of the smell of the pine trees in Silver Creek. He thought of the old radio that only played 3 stations. And most importantly, he thought of Leo, waiting by the dusty window for his father's old truck to pull into the driveway. I can't, Ryan said. Marcus stopped writing mid-stroke. Why? Is it the money? I'll double it. I'll give you a percentage of the company. It's the time, Ryan said, his voice softening. I have a son. He's 9. He needs a dad who's home to help with math homework and cook dinner. He doesn't need a dad who's in a jet over the Atlantic or at a gala in Dubai. I appreciate the offer, Marcus, truly. But I already have the best job in the world. The billionaire was stunned into a deep, uncomfortable silence. He had spent his whole life believing that everyone had a price. He had never been told no by someone who looked like they had so little. The symbol was rejected. Ryan turned his back on the cameras, the fame, and the fortune. He picked up his battered, heavy toolbox, walked through the silent crowd of shamed engineers, and headed for the exit. He had fixed the car. He had done what he came to do. He didn't need to stay for the applause. The next day, the news didn't talk about the impossible car. They talked about the ghost mechanic from the woods. Marcus Vale did something that shocked the financial world. He didn't take the credit for the breakthrough. He went on national television, sitting in the front seat of his roaring McLaren, and told the truth. I thought I was a genius for owning this machine, Marcus said, looking directly into the lens. I thought my money made me an expert. But a man named Ryan Cole taught me that ownership is nothing without understanding. He didn't fix my car for the fame or the millions. He fixed it because he was the only one in the room who truly respected the machine more than his own ego. The culture in the city's showrooms began to shift. The lab coat technicians were replaced by men with grease under their fingernails. The world remembered that mastery isn't about the tools you use, but the spirit you bring to the work. A week later, a low predatory shadow pulled up to the Cole and Son garage in Silver Creek. It was the McLaren glinting in the afternoon sun, looking like a spaceship in a barnyard. Marcus Vale stepped out. He wasn't wearing a suit this time. He was wearing a simple polo shirt and jeans. Ryan was currently under the hood of a 2010 family SUV, covered in the usual grime of a hard day's work. I brought a guest back to its roots, Marcus said, leaning against the garage door. Ryan wiped his hands on a rag and stepped out into the light. Leo was right behind him, his eyes nearly popping out of his head as he saw the hypercar in their own driveway. Can I touch it, Dad? Leo whispered, his voice trembling with excitement. Go ahead, son. She's friendly now. Ryan watched with a quiet smile as his son walked around the $20 million car. Leo wasn't looking at the price tag or the shiny paint. He was looking at the air intakes. He was tracing the lines of the carbon fiber, looking for the secrets his father had taught him. Why didn't you brag, Dad? Leo asked, turning back to Ryan with a serious expression. Everyone at school says you're a superhero. Why didn't you tell the billionaire how smart you are? Ryan knelt down next to his son, his hand resting on the boy's shoulder. Because, Leo, if you have to tell people you're good, then you aren't. True skill is like that engine. When it's right, it speaks for itself. The world makes a lot of noise to cover up its mistakes. But the truth? The truth is usually very quiet. It just waits to be found. Marcus Vale stood by and listened, feeling a strange sense of envy. He realized that Ryan's garage wasn't modest or small. It was exactly the right size for a man who knew exactly what mattered in this life. Before leaving, Marcus handed Ryan a small plain envelope. "It's not a contract," Marcus said, his voice sincere. "It's a scholarship fund for Leo. It's fully funded and irrevocable. No strings attached. You don't have to work for me. You don't even have to like me. Consider it a thank you for teaching me how to hear the truth again." Life in Silver Creek returned to its slow, rhythmic pace. The old radio in the garage still played the same three stations, crackling with static when the wind blew. The coffee was still burnt and bitter. The tools were still organized with a level of care that bordered on the sacred. Every wrench had its shadow on the pegboard, every socket its place in the tray. Business improved, of course. People traveled from 2 states over, bringing their Ferraris and their old Fords, just to have the man who heard the McLaren look at their engines. But Ryan didn't raise his prices. He didn't expand the shop or buy a new building. He stayed Ryan. He still took the time to explain to a nervous teenager why their brakes were squeaking, and he still refused payment from the elderly widow down the road when her heater failed in midwinter. Every afternoon at 3:30, the yellow school bus would hiss to a stop at the end of the gravel road. Leo would drop his bag on the porch and run straight to the workbench. They would work together, the master and the apprentice, fixing the world one bolt at a time, one engine at a time. Ryan watched his son's hands grow steadier, his questions sharper. He saw Sarah in the way Leo focused, with that same quiet intensity that could solve any storm. One cold evening, Ryan sat on the porch steps after Leo had gone to sleep. He looked out at the quiet road. For the first time in 5 years, the silence didn't feel like a void. It felt like a choice. He realized that true mastery wasn't just about fixing a car. It was about fixing a life. He had spent years trying to restart his own heart, and it had taken a broken McLaren and a curious boy to remind him that the spark was never gone. It was just waiting for the right ground. The final scene shows the sun setting over the Silver Creek Mountains, casting long golden shadows over the garage. The orange light reflects off the polished wrenches on the wall. Ryan looks down at the battered wrench keychain on his belt. In his mind, he can still hear the distant, terrifying roar of that McLaren coming to life in the glass showroom. But then he hears something much better. He hears Leo laughing in his sleep from the open window above. He hears the wind in the pines. He hears the steady rhythmic beat of a life well lived. True mastery doesn't need a stage. It doesn't need a microphone or $1 million contract. It only needs silence, a steady hand, and a moment to prove itself. If you believe that healing and inspiring stories like this need to be spread, please leave a comment and subscribe to CPH Healing Stories. We tell the stories that should never be forgotten, because your value doesn't lie in what you own, but in the truth you live every day.